Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today is going to be a special day. We are going to do our first episode of Into the Abyss with Roger Hanson. Now, with me is Bob Dub and Vincent from what is it? What is that? VJM Publishing.
VJM Publishing, that's right. That's my initials, Vincent Jamie McLeod Publishing.
And we have also I forgot your name, man. What's your
Julian.
name? Julian, yes, Julian. And I should know that because old John's had a partner named Julian that I knew. And Julian, they do podcasts of their own, and they've graciously accepted my invitation to come on the show so that we can talk about cool stuff. And this cool stuff involves philosophy. Now, Vincent wanted me to jump straight into Pythagoras, which I think, or I debated on that, to be honest, because Pythagoras has such a infamous name if anybody's into the circles when it comes to philosophy. But at the same time, it was also a good thing to bring up because they almost place him as like a god state, in a god state, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's something that really should be discussed. But before I do that, I do want to talk about Xenophonus and Parmenides. Before, I believe I said those names right. Came close, didn't I, Vince?
I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a ancient Greek language scholar. I just know a lot about the philosophy. So if anyone gets it wrong, don't feel bad. I don't really know 100% either.
Yeah, okay. But anyhow, I want to get into those first, and then we can get into Pythagoras and eventually Plato. That way everybody has a little bit of a background on what we're discussing, and we can move into the last of what it is. It's supposed to be Plato and his theory on forms. But before we do that, I've asked Bob Dub to do a reading for me. This is her reading, and I want her to share it because it was actually pretty cool when I heard it, or read it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob Dub.
Thank you so much, Roger. I'm really honored that you would give me this opportunity. And so thank you, Roger. And also, Vince, thank you. It was your writing on the masculine that inspired me to produce this piece.
Cheers, Bob.
So the feminine, or a woman becomes what her men think of her. The world is balanced by four forces: good, evil, the masculine, and the feminine. Good and evil are constantly at war with each other, while the masculine and the feminine are constantly seeking ways to cooperate with each other. The masculine and the feminine axes are perpendicular to each other and can be imagined as a cross. The masculine axis is a solid perpendicular pillar made out of metals. At the base is lead, followed by tin, iron, copper, silver, mercury, and at the top is gold. The feminine axis is the horizontal arm of the cross, and it surrounds the masculine axis like a nebulous cloud of unseen energy. This feminine energy is both chaotic and orderly at the same time, and can be understood as being made up of the four seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. It could perhaps be helpful to typify the feminine axis as a cylindrical cloud surrounding the metallic pillar of the masculine axis. The state of the feminine axis depends on where it is in relation to the masculine axis. The cloud is strongly influenced by the metal section of the pillar that surrounds it. So, for example, the feminine axis at the level of gold on the masculine axis will be infused by the attributes of gold, but will still strive to find balance along the axis of earth, water, air, fire. It is also important to note that the feminine axis is cylindrical in shape, implying the cyclical nature of the feminine, and also is gaseous as opposed to the solid masculine axis. This illustrates the eternal flux of the feminine. At the bottom of the cloud, the feminine is infused with the principles of lead men. Whereas the men's consciousness is raised, so too the consciousness of the women around them on the feminine axis. In the dance of life, the male leads and the female follows. Femininity expresses and deals with emotion and the non-material world. Masculinity is all about rationality and conquering the physical world. Each season occurs at its own time, and yet during each season the weather can change so that elements of the other seasons appear. The feminine enhances the masculine and allows for it to proceed smoothly, as when the weather is predictable and stable. The feminine is also the happiest when it is efficiently flowing between its many variable states in an orderly and predictable way. The solidity and stability of the masculine provides the energy for the feminine to achieve balance. As the masculine expresses itself throughout a person's life, the person enters into different stages of development and moves, hopefully, from a lower state to a higher state. Therefore, maturity in terms of the masculine axis is about progressing through the ranks and achieving higher states of functioning. The feminine, however, is infused with energy, and there is not progression to higher states of energy. Instead, the feminine is mature when it achieves balance. The feminine is the mistress of balance, cooperation, fairness, equality, and inclusivity. The function of the feminine is to temper the masculine. It is not good for man to be alone. Instead, he has been provided with his reflected opposite, grounded in the reality of his materialism. Man goes out of balance very easily. He is a creature of extremes. The feminine abhors extremes and strives to create entropy. Femininity is mood. The moods flow from one to another, never stopping. Femininity is flow. There is no pinnacle development for a woman. Woman is defined in the moment of giving birth, when she dies to her singular self and becomes 2 life forms, then 3, then 4, then 5. She multiplies herself, and as each birth occurs, so does the death of her previous self. The birth and the death occur in the same instant, just as the winter turns to spring and the summer turns to autumn. Death is life. A female child defines herself in terms of the males in her environment. Her father, uncles, grandfathers, and brothers, and their friends provide a solid and stable network of ideas within which their family and community function. If the men in the environment are iron men, for example, then they provide a hard, uncompromising environment of division, achievement, and order, within which a girl child finds her balance by becoming gentle, nurturant, and inclusive. In a gold environment, where men radiate truth, women develop the ability to teach. The feminine takes the state of the masculine axis around her and magnifies it and then diffuses it throughout the people around her to create the emotional environment that modifies the harsh, judgmental, dispassionate reality of male rationality. But a girl does not mature by rising through the ranks of achievement and self-actualization as a boy does. Instead, within the world her men create for her, a girl strives to achieve balance and harmony. This balance is tenuous and temporary when she is young, but as she achieves maturity, she is able to create and sustain a stable emotional environment for her offspring. This stability tempers the masculine characteristics of the environment, which have to deal with survival and not with procreation. In order to achieve this balance, the woman must cause the energy to flow. There is no solid state that a woman can achieve. The best a woman can hope for is a smooth and beneficial transition between emotional states and a small deviation of emotions around neutral emotional states. A woman struggles for balance in all things, and her day, her year, and her life are all an exercise in achieving equilibrium. The things that need to be balanced are grouped together into 4 categories. Women must be all 4 seasons, each separately, but each also at the same time as the other. Woman must be spring. She must be about looking forward to the longer days, the brighter sunlight and the new babies, the flowers and the fruit. She must feel life and participate in it and channel it spiritually, physically, and psychically. She must lift her face to the sun and feel the joy course through her blood. And at the same time, woman must be summer. She must always remember that the sun feeds the soul and that growth results in the harvest. She must always be guiding, protecting, nurturing, leading. She must stay 2 steps ahead, projecting into the future what the outcome of every word and action will be, and shaping all her words and actions so that the best possible harvest, which is well-adjusted offspring in a well-adjusted community, will result. Women must strive for long sunny days and tranquil warm evenings. She must build a fire for the family to sit around, and she must tell the story of life to them. And always there is autumn. A woman must always consider the fragility of life. She knows when the great bear is sacrificed in the sky, and her soul feels his blood drip down through the leaves, staining them red and yellow and orange. She is surrounded by her children's blood, formed inside her own body, flowing and swirling around her through her home and out into the community, and she knows how easy it is for their blood to be spilled. Every month, a woman relinquishes the old dead blood and tissue that will never form life, and she allows it to mingle with the decay of the world, the blood that will not support life, dead, brown, stinky, foul blood. Within the ecstasy of existence is the agony of loss, of nothingness, and the void. And so there is spring and there is summer, and the end of spring and summer, but all the time there is winter. Winter is not death. Winter is depression, coldness, and aloneness. Winter is the absence of light and the absence of joy. There is a season for everything. Winter is slowness and calm and rejuvenation. Winter is the world of God and peace and soup and love. Winter is when we snuggle close and touch each other and endure and hope. We hope for spring and summer and for life. To balance these things in her heart and gut is the duty and the obligation of each woman. She serves God, the giver of life. She is the one on whom the future depends. He is the one on whom the present depends. She has no time for humor or for danger. Men must provide an environment for their women which is aimed solely at the production and maintenance of new life. In an environment where men of gold provide absolute life-giving stability, life can flourish and multiply. All other environments are second best. For a woman to become fully functioning and integrated, she must be kept safe from all harm and danger. If she is unharmed and actuated, she can be the perfect mother. This is what is important in life. A woman cannot achieve balance and cannot achieve maturity and sanity unless she is bonded securely into a system of rectitudinous men. A woman's main tool to achieving balance is self-sacrifice. There is no room in reproduction for selfishness or individuation. When one woman learns to trust and obey, huge ripples of healing and productivity flow out from the feminine axis into the environment around her, and communities are born. One woman can sustain 12 communities.
That it.
That is it.
That
Thank you.
is excellent. Now,
Yeah, you wrote all that.
yeah,
Yes.
Right. That is amazing.
I read
I
all
can't
that.
believe it.
I read
That's
all that.
that's as good as something I could have written. I think
Wow.
Confucius would have been proud of hearing that. That was really something else. I didn't think you had it in you to write something that good.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Did you
Wow.
did you see?
Yeah,
the,
well done.
Did you see the first interview she did with me, guys?
I may have seen bits of it.
The ending of it, we had her do a reading from one of your books, and she just blew everybody away. I mean, everybody was silent by the time she was done. I mean, that's the whole reason why I wanted her to do that, is because like she's really good at reading, not just writing, but she did an excellent job, you know.
Yeah, no, that was something else. I'm super impressed by that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you so much.
there's things I didn't even realize myself, like such as the fact that the feminine axis is the conduit through which the divine energy that flows down the masculine axis goes through the feminine axis to go from there to the family, and from there to the community and out into the wider world. I didn't really understand that myself, so that's quite good.
That's pretty good.
Well, it's so amazing, Vince, because like you've taught me this stuff. Like everything that you've said to me, like all these thoughts like are in response. So it's almost as if I'm just supplying the feminine bit, the woman point of view. Do you know what I mean? I mean
The devotion. Yeah, no, I understand the devotion. Yeah, but really, my teaching is my own devotion to Confucius, where most of this information originally came before it came to me. So by teaching other people about it, that's my devotion to his rectitude, the rectitude of Confucius, by which we've all been inspired. It sounds like.
Well, that kind of goes into what I was saying at the beginning, okay? Like, today, I wanted everybody to come together to talk about Plato and Plato's theory on forms. But just like Vince, okay, Plato didn't just have an epiphany. This wasn't stuff that just popped into his head, you know? He was a very educated, well-educated man who knew previous teachings, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into when I was talking about getting into Xenophanes and Parmenides, I guess would be the best way of saying his name, because
I think, yeah.
because they were influences on him. You know what I mean? Maybe not directly, but from one to the other. You know, so that's kind of why I wanted to do that. And on the recording, it's taken a half an hour to do that. So I'm gonna ask you guys ahead of time. If we go over an hour, are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, no problem.
How about you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
All good.
So we can get the whole topic covered, and we don't have to worry about saying, well, we've come to the end of the hour. We'll just take that end of the hour and throw it away. So sounds good to me. Okay, so who here has any experience on the teachings of Xenophonus?
I think it's pronounced Xenophanes, but
Xenophanes.
I'm not actually sure. Yeah, Xenophanes. But I've observed that Xenophanes was the father of skepticism, if I'm not mistaken.
Criticism, and he was also probably among one of the first poets to create satires as well because of his criticisms. And he was also because he had a critical style as a poet, you know what I mean? And he had a issue with he'd criticize the values of wealth, excesses, athletics. Like, he wasn't really big on the whole athletic thing, which I understand. There's quite a few people who are like that, but he criticized it. And he also criticized Homer, which I was wrong about, and I want to apologize to you, because the reason why he criticized Homer wasn't because of religious or theological beliefs. It was because Homer made the gods out to be weak, and that was one of the things that he had an issue with. So he made him out to be morally weak and foolish. So that was my bad on that. And like I said before we started, I haven't read up on philosophy for like a year and a half, so I'm kind of shaky on it and memory and stuff. I'm getting old, so folks. So that's basically.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's basically a rundown on him, but if you guys want to discuss some stuff that you know about him, maybe go over a little bit. One thing that he was big on was the first principle. Okay, do you guys know what the first principle is?
It depends on who's saying it. Can mean various things. Can mean the material world. Can mean consciousness. Can mean reason.
Okay.
In the case of Xenophanes, it was more about the material world.
Okay, you have something to say, Julian?
I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with Xenophanes, but I was just looking, and it's interesting. Like you say, he was the originator of, or one of the first people to bring about satirical humor. So he was criticizing other philosophers with the satire.
Now,
I think a lot of his deal was really being the first person, the first man to seriously question the same things that the herd was going along with. The herd, normally people, if you go back to the times of the old priests and the old kings and the old chiefs, you just basically believed whatever you were told, and you didn't really ask questions, otherwise you kind of got destroyed by the authorities. But in ancient Greece, they had that freedom. They had that freedom of thought that hadn't existed previously, and so someone like Xenophanes was able to come along and satirize so much about the existing culture and society, not only the politicians but also their myths, like the Homeric myths. That's very much like how Giordano Bruno was criticizing Catholicism in 1600 AD. It's a very big deal. So he would have started the tradition of doing that.
Now,
And interesting,
go ahead.
like you say about Pythagoras, of course, as well, being into the mathematics and having an academy where people came to study mathematics. That's obviously had an influential effect on Plato as well, because of the world of forms being very much mathematical in nature. So it's interesting to look at the context of where philosophers like Socrates and Plato came from and the influences that were happening on them.
Yeah, it's surprising how many influences there are, because you tend to think of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle as so great, but they really did have, well, they are great, but they also did have a lot of prior influences. And even those early Greeks had a lot of prior influences from the Egyptians. Like the great thing about Pythagoras, he was probably the first Greek to ever go to Egypt and study in the Egyptian mysteries with the Egyptian priesthood. So he was one of the first to take that ancient Egyptian knowledge and come back to ancient Greece with it and start teaching other people about it, which is why he was so amazing, and probably why they killed him in the end.
Now, with Xenophane, when it comes to him being a thinker, he was a highly original thinker, and like what he mostly sought was explanations for physical phenomena like clouds and rainbows, and he wouldn't give references to the divine or mythical. You know what I mean? There was no divine or mythical explanation. And that's where he basically based all of his thinking, his original thinking, off of the first principles, where he wanted to find out where it stemmed from, where there was no previous origin. You know what I mean? The original beginning of like each concept and stuff like that. So that was a big thing that he was against, or he was for, you know. He also distinguished between different forms of knowledge and beliefs. He was what do they call it? Epistemology. I keep
Epistemology, yeah.
Yeah, he was big on that, and I believe that he might have been like the founder of it. He might have been one of the first of being founded or founding that belief. But I'm not quite sure on that. You can't.
Well, he was skeptical about mortals having divine knowledge of God, so he essentially is coming up with the precursor to the modern scientific method, isn't he, by reasoning from first principles, from what we can see from the natural world, and essentially saying it's too difficult to know the nature of God and things like that. So that's very much credited with being the precursor to the sort of scientific method we see today. But then we come to the limits of that when you don't have an explanation for the divine, then how can you explain where all of the natural material world comes from?
Exactly. And it's what I'm about to say is controversial among a lot of the scholars, and they dispute these claims that I'm about to make. But it's also believed that the Iliasts and the Parmenides, they saw Xenophane as the founder of their doctrines, and they also interpreted his works into terms for their doctrines as well. But like I said, scholarship disputes these claims, but the modern scholarship actually, like back in the day, there was no dispute about it, but now they're starting to question it and stuff like that. So I did want to mention that as well, and that's the reason why I believe Xenophanes should have been discussed, and Parmenides and talk about him, you know. So before I do that, though, with what I was saying, have you guys heard anything or discussed anything when it comes to his connections with Parmenides and the Eleistics? The Eleistics is a school that was formed in Parmenides' hometown, and it was that's where they come up with the Eleistics. So, just saying. But have you guys heard anything about that, or is it?
That's a new one to me, Roger.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you mean
Yeah.
Eleistics? Oh, yeah, with an E. Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
thought you said with an I. It's
Eleistics.
yeah, that's right. I know. Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah. I mean, sounds like you're up with more Greek philosophers than we are, Roger.
Well,
But
he.
yeah. A lot of them fall into specific schools of thought. You know, like you're saying, the empiricists, like we just discussed, are one school of thought, and then the idealists and that are another school of thought. You also had in ancient Greece a big debate between the flat earthers and the globe earthers.
Yeah, you can see how Xenophanes was the first of, or one of the first of the line of people who started actually thinking about science properly. The line that would have led to Aristotle and then to Francis Bacon and so on to our modern world. So really, we've got a lot to thank such men for. Otherwise, we'd probably still be really primitive, just believing whatever the priesthood said and not questioning it too much. Like the skeptics, they trace their school back to Xenophanes and say he was pretty much the first guy that ever started thinking skeptically, which was to say he questioned the authorities.
And the fact that he was into satires on top of it, that just kind of sets him into a whole different category, you know what I mean? So, I mean, for me personally, I think it does, because I get into writing, you know. I'm not only into doing all this cool stuff, but I like to sit down and write, you know. And as a writer, hearing this great philosopher also being a satire, I mean, that's actually pretty mind-blowing if you think about it, you know. It really is. He would have been, oh my goodness, he would have been the college wits of his day. He would, you know.
Yeah, it's wicked that he wasn't just a master of theology, but also more of the humanities, like arts, culture. I think that's they tried to do that back in ancient Greece. They didn't so much hyper focus on one extremely specialized set of thinking or actions. They were more generalized, which I think's great. I wish it was more like that now.
Yeah, well, this Elias is interesting, talking about his beliefs in God, belief in a corporeal God, so believing that God could be essentially a physical being in the material world rather than, the Platonic idea of an ethereal God. So that's certainly an interesting concept from Elias there.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about Ilias and everything, we have to start talking about Parmenides. Now, he was a late 6th and early 5th century pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, and he was from Elea in Magna Graecia, I guess is the way it's pronounced. Now, that was the time period that they've got him dated at, but don't get me wrong, in Plato's dialogue, they really don't have a set time on how old he was and stuff like that, because like in Plato's dialogue, Plato places him at the age of 65 in 475 BC, but Diogenes indicated that he flourished just before 500 BC. That would put his birth at 540 BC, where Plato would have placed it at 515 BC. So right there, that's another issue that I do want to mention, because like a lot of people get this idea that these philosophers are like the time periods that they were alive is accurate, and that's not the case for a lot of philosophers. Like there's time missing, and it's hard for them to really calculate what time period they're from. Pythagoras is a good example of that. They really don't have very much information on them, and a lot of it isn't really like written down. So I do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Go ahead.
It's amazing how little information has actually survived and how much of it has had to have been reconstructed over the years. I mean, let's not forget that a lot of this ancient Greek knowledge was actually destroyed in Europe after the fall of Rome, but thanks to it being kept alive in other parts of the world, it was able to come back to Europe during the Renaissance. Otherwise, we might not know about many of these ancient philosophers of ancient Greece. May have all been forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing how many texts have forgotten, and even this Parmenides, he's only got one text that's survived in the modern day.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it's just fragments. It's incredible. Like Parmenides, he could have written 20 books like Aristotle did, for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're all lost.
No,
But
it's also been thought that he was in his prime around 475 BC. So that was a set date that they ended up having. But I did want to say that for sure. That's something I forgot to say as well. So it was right around 475 where he was in his prime, and they explained. It's hard to explain, but there's a way that they date time periods according to people's prime, which I believe is at the age of 40. They considered that being in your prime. So
yeah, they've got a different idea to modern Westerners when your prime is like 18 to 25, when you're boozing it up at university and getting laid. They say that's your prime, and then after that you join the hard working world and you suffer for the rest of your life until you go on the pension. Like in ancient Greece, it was more like you spend your 20s and 30s actually trying to figure out what's going on in the world. So you're really just learning. You're doing your apprenticeship as a man, and it's not until age 40 that you've actually got some idea about what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. Now,
yes, and then you have to be over a certain age to be a philosopher king in the Republic, right? Isn't it 50?
Man, that's insane. Especially considering, like, well, in the Egyptian world, I know their lifespans were really, really, really young. Like 40 years old was almost an old man, So that would be something to really take a look at. When I mean, I've actually browsed through the information, but I've never really did a deep dive on it. So maybe that's something I might do in the future. Now, on nature. Now, this is where it starts getting really cool. In this poem, he suggested his views on reality, the way of Aletheia and Doxa, and Vincent even commented on this. So with this, I want to go into Aletheia and discuss his view on that. Do either of you guys have any information you want to put out on Aletheia, or should I just go ahead and read a description of it?
Just one thing I'd like to say is his two concepts of Aletheia and Doxa, they're very similar to the second tenet of elementalism, which says that the conceivable universe is divided into consciousness, and the contents of consciousness. Aletheia really seems to refer to consciousness in the spiritual sense, and doxa to the contents of consciousness, which are of course ever changing, in contrast to the aletheia.
If you want to dive into that some, give us a little bit of an example of what you're discussing right there, so that, you know what I mean, kind of elaborate on that.
Well, when Parmenides was speaking about aletheia, or the truth, he was speaking about principles that don't change. So he's really talking about that's a very embryonic form of what would later come to be known as the theory of forms that Plato elaborated at length. So the aletheia refers to the divine realm of unchanging attributes, which is outside of time, outside of space, as opposed to the doxa, which is really more of a material kind of thing. So Parmenides, he conceptualized the split between the higher worlds and the material worlds, the lower worlds.
Okay, there you go. I thought I'd have to leave it on widescreen so that you could have a couple minutes to elaborate. You did a really quick job of that. That was good. I'm not used to that, man. Thank you, Vince.
Right.
Okay.
No, that's all good.
That was pretty good, actually. I was impressed. I had to pull it off of the full screen and everything. Now, aletheia, according to this, is the truth or disclosure of in philosophy. Originally in ancient Greek philosophy, the term was explicitly used for the first time in the history of philosophy by Parmenides in his poem On Nature, in which he contrasts it with doxa. It was revived in the works of 20th century philosophy. Martin Heidegger, although often translated as truth, Heidegger argued that it is distinct from common concepts of truth. Now, in antiquity, aletheia is variously translated as concealedness, disclosure, revealing, or unclosedness. The literal meaning of the word is the state of not being hidden, the state of being evident. It also means factually or reality. It is the antonym of lethe, which literally means oblivion, forgetfulness, or concealment, according to Pindar's first Olympian ode. In Greek mythology, Aletheia was personified as a Greek goddess, Aletheia. In some accounts, she was a daughter of Zeus, while Aesop's fables state she was crafted by Prometheus. In Interpretatio Graeco, she was equated with Veritas, the Roman goddess of truth. So there you go, got that covered. So, you got any comments on that?
Yeah, well, it's very much influential on Plato, isn't it? Because he talks, of course, a lot about truth, and truth being an absolute thing in the world of forms, whereas today we have this idea of postmodernism where everyone can make up their own truth, and that there's no one objective truth, and truth is just what everyone chooses to identify with as the truth. So, of course, postmodernism is, diametrically opposed to the likes of what Parmenides is writing in there about the revealing. Everything that can be revealed is the eternal truth, because it's, like you say, it's unchanging, it's always true.
Well, it seems like back then in ancient Greece, they were really determined to come up with a methodology by which they could distinguish truth from falsehood. Whereas now, in the postmodern age, like you said, Jules, it's just about making things up. You know, you can just make up whatever you want and just say, well, that's my truth, and that's how it is. But I guess Parmenides would say that was just people getting lost in the world of doxa and abandoning aletheia completely. But that just goes to show how far we've degenerated. You know, all these great philosophers, we've gone backwards from where they were.
Now that you mentioned that, the whole time you guys have been talking, the word doxa has just been popping up in my head. So I think that's the point where we need to elaborate on doxa. So I believe the best way of doing that is to have Vince give us a little feedback on what doxa is and tell us a little bit about it, kind of give his explanation.
Well, doxa can really only be understood in reference to aletheia, meaning the truth. So doxa doesn't mean lies, it just means opinions. And the sort of thing that people come by not from using logic and using reason to determine what the truth might be, but from sensory perception. So your sensory perception might tell you that so-and-so is a bad person, but that's just an opinion. That's part of the world of doxa. So doxa really refers to the material world, that which is eternally changing. I suppose you could say that it refers to, it was a form of feminine, form of understanding the feminine, as opposed to the masculine aletheia, which is more concerned with the absolute.
Yeah, very much contains people's opinions and beliefs and false beliefs, or like we were saying with the postmodernists, that would fit right in with the doxa, because it's all of the people can believe whatever they want to believe in the doxa because it's their opinion, it's not the absolute truth. And it's like why they have modal logic now, so that you have a logic system which represents the true statements, but then you also have a modal logic which represents what an individual believes to be true. So that can happen essentially in a silo, so that it's not contaminating the truth of the overall logic system with baseless opinions.
Oh, you should have heard Vince before we got on here. He reviewed, I guess, that doxastic logic that I posted up on my live stream. He said it could be kind of complicated. I could go over that, but I'm not gonna do it. It's horrible. It really is. Like the logic behind doxa is insane, and they've got an outline for it. That's the crazy part about it. Like for doxa, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Get complicated.
Yeah, it gets complicated real quick. It's the types of, they have reasoners. Doxastic logic is a type of logic concerning the reasoning about beliefs. And doxa is a common belief in popular opinion, in classical rhetoric, which rhetoric is kind of another thing too. Like it's more rhetoric than anything else. Like I can just throw rhetoric up and see how many people feed into it, and the only reason why I'm doing it is because I'm wanting to elevate in status, you know what I mean, or something like that. It's in contrast with episteme or knowledge. So that's the basic first part of it. Then the etymology, the term doxa is ancient Greek noun related to the verb doxein, D-O-K-E-I-N, meaning to appear, to seem, to think, to accept. And between the 3rd and the 1st century BC, the term picked up an additional meaning, with the Septuagint used when the Septuagint used doxa to translate the biblical Hebrew word for glory. This Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures was used by the early church, as used by the early church, led to frequent use of the term in the New Testament, and the word also used in the worship services of Greek Orthodox churches. So that's interesting right there.
So they've essentially appropriated that word for a different meaning, because the kavod is the some people believe it's like a craft that the god flies around in. Other people think it's like the glory that surrounds God, but that's obviously a different meaning, and they've used the same word, doxa, which originally, as we discussed, meant people's opinions and beliefs that were not necessarily true, of course.
Now, the term doxastic derives from the Greek, from which the English term doxa, popular opinion or belief, is also borrowed. Typically, a doxastic logic uses the notation, looks like B and a small x, to mean it is believed that so-and-so is the case, and set B, blah, 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 and then it starts getting into, like, math equations. In doxastic logic, belief is treated as a model operator. That's where you was talking about like models and outlines and stuff like that, and like it comes down here. It says there is complete parallelism between a person who believes propositions and a formal system. That's it. You said formal systems. And derives propositions. Using doxastic logic, one can express the epistemic counterpart of Gödel's incompleteness theorem of metalogic, as well as Loeb's theorem, and other metalogical results. I can't believe metalogic. I can't believe I had a hard time saying that. And other and other metalogical results in terms of belief. So they have after that they go into crazy stuff like types of reasoners and things of that. I can share the link if you guys want to check that out.
Oh, that was interesting. What was it saying again in relation to Gödel's incompleteness theorem? Because that's certainly a fascinating subject.
Well, give us a little feedback on that. Once you say it, you gotta do it. So
yeah, well, it's created huge problems in mathematics, because you had the likes of Bertrand Russell, who tried to write the Principia Mathematica and formalize all of mathematics into one big book, but it was Gödel's incompleteness theorem which proved that there would always be something that they couldn't put into that mathematical system, the incompleteness. There would be some true statement which they couldn't prove, and there would be always some unknown quantity in the system. And because of the incompleteness theorem, as soon as you think you've got a complete system, you basically realize that that's just a much smaller cog in a bigger machine, and then that system has incompleteness as well. So it creates a paradox. If everything's incomplete, how do we stop just an infinite recursion? There must be some point at which the system does become complete and unified again. So it still puzzles philosophers and mathematicians. So it's interesting that it came up in connection with that doxastic logic.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting too, but it like I said, it gets really complex. I put a link in the chat over here on the side if you guys want to click on
But,
it and look at it.
Ultimately, at the heart of the incompleteness theorem is the paradox P and not P. So you have a proposition and the opposite of that proposition both being true at the same time. So it's a contradiction and absurdity, but it's almost like it's oscillating between the two. It's almost like the proposition is going from true to false, back and forward. So it's very much like a yin-yang symbol where true and false are just swapping back and forward, because as soon as something becomes true, the opposite of it becomes true. So paradoxes are very much at the heart of this very complex mathematical idea.
It's very much like how each of us are consciousness and the material world all at the same time. Like our being is some kind of mixture of consciousness and a material phenomenon called the body, which couldn't possibly have given rise to consciousness. So that, yeah, you can see why that would transition back and forth. If you think of yourself as consciousness, then that's one state, and if you think of yourself as your body, that's another state.
It's pretty good. Now we have to get to Pythagoras. This is Vince's favorite part. This is what he's here for. Now, one thing that I did want to mention first was his early life. Herodotus, Isocrates, and other early writers agree with Pythagoras. Now, that Pythagoras was the son of Menisarchus, or how do you say that? Menisarchus.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
And that he was born...
Menisarchus.
Yeah, Menisarchus. And he was born on the Greek island of Samos in the eastern Aegean. According to those biographers, Pythagoras' father was not born on the island, although he got naturalized there. But according to Lamblicus, he was a native of the island. He is said to have been a gem engraver or a wealthy merchant, but his ancestry is disputed and unclear. His mother was a native of Samos, descending from a Geomori or Moi family. Apollonius of Tyana gives her name as Pythias. Lamblichus gives her name as Pythias. Lamblicus tells the story that Pythia prophesied to her while she was pregnant with him that she would give birth to a man supremely beautiful, wise, and beneficial to humankind. So that's where we start getting, in my opinion, to the idolizing and stuff like that. So I mean, I'll open that up to you guys and let you guys do your comments on that. Do you think that was probably a little embellishment put there?
Well, Pythagoras was certainly a powerful figure. He ended up becoming a cult leader and probably getting killed for the reason that he had a cult that was a threat to the democracy of the time. So he was definitely a very, very big deal.
But what about what he said about Pythagoras being a beautiful, wise, and prophesying that she was going to give birth to Pythagoras, who was wise and beautiful, who's going to be a wise and beautiful man? Do you think that might have been embellished a little bit?
Possibly. But what I do know about Pythagoras is that he was, because he was also a vegetarian, that was part of his cult, and that was an original thing. back in the day that was possibly influenced by Egyptian contact that had come through ancient India. So that was really original for ancient Greece. Like the thought of just not eating meat for spiritual reasons is just not something that people would think of if they'd been brought up on the Iliad. So yeah, he was quite original in that way. So he was probably a minor religious figure in the centuries that followed.
Okay. Yeah, and I know when it comes to beauty and wisdom and stuff like that, that was a real strong Egyptian belief. Like, they really thought that was important in their culture, you know. So it does make sense. Now,
Yeah, well, they would have
ahead.
had a concept of this higher knowledge being brought to them through the gods. Like the ancient Egyptians would have believed in Hermes Trismegistus, and they would have believed that such beings were like intermediaries between the higher powers and humanity. So Pythagoras would have probably just been another one of these to a slightly lesser extent.
Okay. So now, it was mentioned that he left Samos at the age of 40, which would have given the date of his birth to 570 BC, when Polycrates was in reign. So they said that he would his date of birth would have been around 570 BC. Pythagoras' name led him to be associated with Pythian Apollo. Aristippus of Cyrene in the 4th century BC explained his name by saying he spoke the truth no less than did the Pythian, or Pythian, whichever way you say it. Now, during Pythagoras' formative years, Samos was a thriving cultural hub known for its feats of advanced architectural engineering, including the building of the tunnel of Eupolinus, and for its Riotus festival. How do you say that? Riotus festival culture. It was a major.
Riotous.
What is it?
Riotous.
Oh,
Riotous.
riotous. That must be.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Riotous. Okay. It was a major center for trade in the Aegean, where traders brought goods from the Near East. According to Christian L. Jost Gaugier, these traders almost certainly brought with them Near East ideas and traditions. Pythagoras' early life also coincides with the flowering of early Ionian natural philosophy. He was a contemporary of the philosophers Anaximander, Anaximenes, and the historian Hecataeus, all of whom lived in Miletus, across the sea from Samos. So
I'll tell you one thing that really fascinates me about Pythagoras is that he seems to have come into contact with a bunch of ancient Indian ideas, like a lot of ancient Vedic ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the Greek religions, they would have shared a common ancestor with the existing Hinduism that exists today. So the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, they would have followed an Indo-European tradition that would have had certain ideas. Like it says, the teaching most securely identified with Pythagoras is metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls, which holds that every soul is immortal and upon death enters into a new body. And that's just the Hindu idea of reincarnation, which was shared with the ancient Greek religions before they were replaced by Christianity, because Plato writes about this also in Timaeus about metempsychosis and how it's just an established fact. So it's interesting that they thought like this, whereas we are lost in the world of doxa so much that we don't understand aletheia to the extent that we even know about reincarnation anymore. You know, most people are materialists, and they think the body is what they really are, and when the body dies, that's it. So Pythagoras would have had some very different ideas, believing in reincarnation, and he would have been a vegetarian for the sake of hoping to gain a more auspicious rebirth, like many Hindus are. So it's interesting that he would have had such ideas going way back then.
Right.
And it's interesting to see all the parallels with what you see in the Socratic texts in Plato. Like you said, the riotous festival culture, and in Plato's books, often Socrates will be traveling to some festival and he will meet people along the way, and that's actually the scene that these books are set in. So there's also the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, where they would have these big festivals and they would participate in the kykeon, which is believed to be some sort of psychedelic substance which was commonly taken by a large number of people in the society once a year. And of course the other parallel with Plato and Pythagoras is the fact that they had the academy, where it's very much an elite educational institute focused primarily on mathematics and philosophy. So Pythagoras has obviously had his academy, and then Socrates and Plato have gone on and set up their own academies. So it's very much to keep what would be called the mystery school knowledge now contained, so that it wasn't lost or diluted by the outside culture.
Exactly. Now, modern scholarship has shown that the culture of archaic Greece was heavily influenced by those of the Levantine and Mesopotamian cultures. Like many other important Greek thinkers, Pythagoras was said to have studied in Egypt. By the time the Isocrates in the 4th century BC, Pythagoras' reputed studies in Egypt were already taken as fact. So, his studies in Egypt was even before Socrates. So, it was just generally considered a fact, a taken fact. You know what I mean by that point. So,
yeah.
There you go.
Well, a lot of the great philosophers would have done that. Many people would have participated in the mystery schools, like the Eleusinian mysteries, and they would have taken a psychedelic and seen beyond. But anybody who really wanted to take it further in ancient Greece would have probably had to have gone to Egypt, which would have been like probably the similar way that we see Europe nowadays. If you're in somewhere like America or Australia, New Zealand, you kind of see Europe as a place which has more learning, more knowledge, more culture, and that is how the Greeks would have seen Egypt. So if they wanted to get educated, they would have gone to Egypt the same way that a modern person might go to Germany or France or Britain.
Now, when we were talking before the stream started, you had mentioned that we might have to mention Heraclitus in the Atomist as well. So I think this would be a perfect time for you to break in and kind of give a little bit of a story on that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, Heraclitus, not so much is known about him, but he's really his most famous idea is what's called the unity of opposites, which Terence McKenna used to talk about. He called it the coincidentia oppositorum, and it's very similar to what's known as the second Hermetic principle, which is the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. Many people have heard that phrase before. It's from ancient Egyptian learning. So Heraclitus may have been another one who traveled to ancient Egypt to become a great philosopher, and he knew about the unity of opposites, which Newton also knew about this. It's an alchemical law. So when Newton came up with his law of motion that said every action has an equal and opposite reaction, he was just referring to this law of correspondence that Heraclitus would have been the first Westerner to speak about. So yeah, he was sort of different to Democritus. Heraclitus was kind of a bit angry, and so he contrasted with Democritus, who was a happy sort of person. And Democritus was the guy who came up with the concept of the material world being made of atoms, because previously then it was mostly just thought of as being energies like air, fire, earth, and water. But Democritus was one of the first to be so materialistic that he conceived of it in terms of atoms. Atom being the ancient Greek word for indivisible. So he invented that word, and we still use it today in materialist science.
Now, the thing that interests me about him and Pythagoras together, and a lot of people don't really put the connection on this, but I do see it, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but like when you listen to what's being discussed about Pythagoras, especially with Pythagoras, and then you take a look at a lot of the Gnostic readings, okay, then you hear Adam. Adam was also mentioned in the Gnostic writings in kind of the same type of structure, you know. So for me, when people debate on if Gnostics is more of an Egyptian Christian mix, you know, I have no doubt in my mind, because you can obviously hear the blending of Christianity with Egyptian, you know, with that. And the same goes when it comes to Pythagoras. You can definitely hear the Egyptian influence in there, you know. So that's just my personal belief, but I'd like to know what you guys think about that when it comes to Gnosticism and the Pythagoras.
Yeah, well, it was the Egyptians who were first credited with coming up with the idea of monotheism, which was Akhenaten, who was supposed to have thought it up a very long time ago. And it was his idea that there was only the one God, and that the gods were something that wasn't so important. So yeah, that would have been a big deal. That would have influenced a lot.
And yeah, like you say, the Egyptian mystery schools has had a huge influence not only on Greek but also on Christian culture, and being the proximity, of course, of these countries. Egypt was once part of the Greek Empire, so they were still traveling within the Greek Empire, and of course the library at Alexandria was a huge store of knowledge in the ancient world, and of course catastrophically destroyed with fire. And like you say, it's really the Gnostic side of Christianity which is talking about these perennial truths, and it's very much suppressed in the mainstream versions of Christianity, because Gnosticism's considered fairly fringe, and it's but it's definitely talking a lot more along the same lines, because in the biblical narrative, of course, the wise men came when Jesus was born, and he was supposedly Herod put out the order to kill the babies, and they fled to Egypt. So if you believe those scriptures, then Jesus would have grown up in Egypt as a young boy, because he would have been fleeing from persecution as a baby, you know. So those influences could have been the reason why he wasn't, necessarily just talking about Judaism. He may have been talking about ideas that he picked up on his travels that could have included Eastern religions as well.
And I'd also like to remind anybody who's watching this that Pythagoras was quite a bit of time before the time of Jesus, so these ideas would have already blended into that society pretty good by that point, you know what I mean? So, and that's another thing that, you know, I had an issue with when I first started reading about it. I didn't comprehend the time periods that these people were in, you know what I mean? Like, Pythagoras was way before the time of Jesus, and you're talking about Old Testament time periods when it comes to Pythagoras, you know what I mean? So that's how far back this stuff goes. It's really interesting. When I finally comprehended that, it just dawned on me. I mean, this is ancient knowledge, man. This is back during the times of Babylon, you know. So
Yeah. Well, that's where some of it would have come from. Like Pythagoras' understanding of astronomy possibly came from the Babylonians originally. That because they developed a lot of the old mathematics, like Pythagoras' theorem, which he's well known for. It was actually originally something that they came up with in old Babylon, and he probably inherited that knowledge from Babylon via Egypt. So a lot of this idea is really so old that you can't even remember who came up with them originally. Like Parmenides, he may have been 2,500 years ago, but the ideas that he's famous for, they may have been first thought up 2,500 years before that, for all we know. Perhaps as far back as ancient Sumer or the ancient Indus Valley civilization may have thought up some of these ideas.
Okay. Now, we need to get into numerology. Okay, the so-called Pythagoreans, who were the first to take up mathematics, not only advanced this subject, but saturated with it. They fancied that the principles of mathematics were the principles of all things, and that's Aristotle in Metaphysics 1 through 5, circa 350 BC. According to Aristotle, the Pythagoreans used mathematics for solely mystical reasons, devoid of practical application. They believed that all things were made of numbers. The number 1, the monad, represented the origin of all things. The number 2, the dyad, represented matter. The number 3 was an ideal number because it had a beginning, middle, and end, and was the smallest number of points that could be used to define a plane triangle, which they revered as a symbol of the god Apollo. The number 4 signified the 4 seasons and the 4 elements. The number 7 was also sacred because it was the number of planets and the number of strings on a lyre lyre. And because Apollo's birthday was celebrated on the 7th day of each month. They believed that odd numbers were masculine and even numbers were feminine, and that the number 5 represented marriage because it was the sum of 2 and 3. So right there, Bob Dub, you have done a great job at writing about masculine and feminine. So I want you to talk a little bit, because after that reading, what comes through your mind?
I think that it's absolutely fascinating that you say that. I didn't realize that Apollo's birthday was celebrated every single month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and 5 being the marriage being the, I mean, how is that? Say something more about that. Marriage is the union of 2 and 3, and 2 and 3 are masculine and feminine. Is that what you were saying?
It's the sum of both 2 and 3.
So interesting. So I've never heard of that before. So 2 being matter and 3 being the ideal number. it's just so interesting to me that I've known it, and I know before from like emotions. Our words for emotions are the words for physical actions, like roll with the punches or stand your ground or things like that. But I had never realized that the principles of mathematics were the principles of all things. So yeah, I'm a bit gobsmacked at this moment in time. My brain is sort of like just vibrating.
Did you notice also, Bob, when Roger was talking about the magical number 7, that also reflects the number of steps in the Mithrak ladder, or the Great Masculine Axis. So you'd spoken about that previously on the show already. The 7 alchemical metals going up from lead to gold. That is also a reflection of that magical number 7.
But let's not forget, I missed one of them that needs to be mentioned. And 10 is regarded as the perfect number. Okay. And the Pythagoreans honored it by never gathering in groups larger than 10. So.
It's interesting what you said about the masculine and the feminine being the odd and even numbers, because it reflects what is in the I Ching, which is the 64 hexagrams derived from the yin yang symbol essentially, but you have 6 of them to form each of these symbols, and the 1 and the 2 are the masculine and the feminine in that as well. So presumably the 3 must represent a masculine as well, because the 2 and the 3 together makes the marriage of the 5.
That's right. Yep, that's true.
Okay, so
yeah, Pythagoras was all into this magical numbers. Like he had the tetractys. It's probably worth talking about the tetractys at this point.
Yep,
which is
what we're going in.
Which is your pyramid. It's like a pyramid of 10 dots arranged in 4 levels, such that the highest level has 1 dot, and the second highest level has 2 dots, next level has 3, and the bottom level has 4. And that represents the top level being 1 single dot. That represents the unity of all. In other words, how it represents the Tao. So it represents God and the material world all together in one power, one energy that's beyond time and space and thought. And then the second level, of course, represents the division of that original godness into masculine and feminine, such that you have the feminine on the left measured by a 0, and the masculine on the right measured by a 1. And then on the third level, you have, as said before, you have such a thing as time now, because you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that represents the alchemical elements of mercury, salt, and sulfur, such that salt is in the middle, it represents stability. Mercury is on the left-hand side, that represents the more feminine, changeable, fluid and liquid aspects of things, and sulfur is on the far right, which represents the more masculine, fiery energy that rises above. And of course, the level below that has 4 stages. Those represent earth, water, air, and fire, such that the furthest left can represent earth because it's the most feminine. Next to the right is water because it's the next most masculine, and then you have air because that's more masculine still, and furthest to the right you have fire, which is the most masculine element. So really you can imagine it as just one single point, which then descends downwards into the material world, and in doing so divides itself into masculine and feminine, because of course God is neither masculine nor feminine, but also both and neither at the same time, and therefore God is not divided into anything until God extrudes God's self downwards into the material world, and in doing so God becomes masculine and feminine, and air, earth, fire, and water, and all the other things. So if you add all those dots together, you have 10. That's why 10 was considered the magic number of completeness, and the Pythagoreans didn't like gathering in groups of 10 because they thought it meant that one of them was going to die because there were so many. So 10 is like the the perfect number that contains all of this knowledge within it. The 4 levels of the Tetractys.
That is just so incredible. It is just so amazing. It's like the most perfect map of the world.
It is. No, it is. It's absolutely astonishing. And that Tetractys was, there's an entire chapter about this in The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. So if you want to know more about the Tetractys and Pythagoras, because there is actually a whole chapter about Pythagoras as well, and how he was a vegetarian and how he believed in reincarnation, and how this may have been influenced by ancient Indian ideas. So yeah, definitely, if you're interested in these topics, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I had to step away to have an emergency with the restroom, so I came back and I wanted to bring up the symbols too, with like the monad, the dyad, the triad, and the tetrad, you know.
Yep.
Unity, power, harmony, and cosmos. That is the first 4 numbers. The first 4 numbers symbolize the musica universalis and the cosmos. So now, if I remember correctly, this also has to do with something that you're talking about with vibrations and music, right, Vince?
It's very similar, yeah, because on the far left of the Tetractys, you'd have your low vibrational energies. So you'd have your cold and your dark and your damp energies. And on the right-hand side of the Tetractys, you'd have your masculine energies. So that'd be the warm and the light sort of energies. So the world that we experience, the sensible world, is just in between those 2 extremes. God splits God's self into an extreme of feminine and an extreme of masculine, and in between is the entire great fractal that the entire material world that we experience from day to day.
Okay.
It was incredible, yeah, how much they were able to come back to the actual first principles of things. Like if you think that in our world today we think in terms of computers and cars and infrastructure and all of these extremely derived concepts, but Pythagoreans were thinking about the Tetractys in those 4 levels, like you said, unity, power, harmony, and cosmos. Yeah, it's wicked.
You know, the 4 rows add up to 10, which was unity of a higher order. The decad, D-E-K-A-D. And then the tetrasides symbolize the 4 classic elements: air, fire, water, and earth. So that kind of goes into what Bob Dub was talking about in her reading, where she was talking about air, fire, water, and earth.
Yeah, well, the lowest level of the Tetractys is really pretty much the same thing as the great feminine axis, and then you have the masculine axis right of that, which leads back to the one. If you get to the highest point on the great masculine axis, you get back to the one, the monad, and you understand the nature of the divine.
All right.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting how that's set up. And
It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. That's mathematical to the point. I mean, sorry about that, but this right here basically could go right into every type of math that we have today, to be honest with you, when you think about it, like even calculus to a certain degree. I mean,
Yep.
it's pretty interesting.
Yep. It's
Okay.
fascinating. You know, I love it. I couldn't believe it when I read about Pythagoras and the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it was shown to me that he could encapsulate so much knowledge in the Tetractys. All it is 10 dots. You know, it's just 10 dots. But if you know what those 10 dots mean, you can actually derive an incredible amount of what would have been ancient Egyptian knowledge.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Well, it's just like with the Sumerians and their math, okay? I've seen an example of how they did their counting with fingers, and like we use slide rule, you know what I mean, where they could actually use their hands to do the same thing. And this was complicated math. This was back at the beginning of civilization, you know, and these guys were doing freaking complicated math on their hands. You know.
Yeah. I guess they just had to make do, since they would have been the first ones doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting when I see that kind of stuff. So now that we've done the tetrasites, do you guys want to cover the mysticism? We've done numerology. Do you want to cover the mysticism with
Here you're talking about reincarnation,
Pythagoras?
or
Okay. Another beautiful attribute to Pythagoras was of the harmony of the spheres, which maintained that the planets and stars moved according to mathematical equations, which correspond to musical notes and thus produce an inaudible symphony. According to Porphyry, Pythagoras taught that the 7 muses were actually the 7 planets singing together. In his philosophical dialogue, Pittacus, Aristotle has his literary double say. When Pythagoras was asked, he said to observe the heavens, and he used to claim that he himself was an observer of nature, and it was for the sake of this that he had passed over into life. Pythagoras was said to have practiced divination and prophecy. In the visits of various places in Greece, Delos, Spartus, Philus, Crete, etc., which are ascribed to him, he usually appears either as his religious or priestly guise, or else as a lawgiver. Pythagoras and his followers reportedly had a spiritual practice known as smoke trapping. This involved entering an enclosed space, typically a cave, and lighting a fire until noxious fumes filled the room. They would inhale the smoke and would experience vivid hallucinations due to oxygen deprivation and hypercapnia. They supposedly would see divine geometric shapes and patterns, which they would copy onto the walls with charcoal to be analyzed at a later point. So
yeah, tell you what that reminds me of, the smoke trapping. That reminds me of how the ancient Scythians would gather in these big tents and essentially hotbox them with cannabis by taking up all these superheated hot rocks and then chucking cannabis flowers on them until they burned, and the entire tent would become full of cannabis smoke, and they would go in there and they'd hotbox themselves, they'd inhale all the smoke, and yeah, they would experience vivid hallucinations, not only due to hot oxygen deprivation, but also to the high of the cannabis. Now, I don't know if Pythagoras, I'm pretty sure he was smart enough not to just light a fire of wood and get oxygen deprivation from the wood fumes. I'm pretty sure he would be clever enough to have sourced something like, if not cannabis, then perhaps frankincense or something similar, and had a proper, actual, real spiritual experience, similar to what Herodotus wrote about the Scythians doing.
And he was most likely aware of what Herodotus had written about the Scythians, so it's quite possible that he was doing the same thing there with the cannabis in the hot box.
Yeah,
but
very
it's
likely.
fascinating what they described there, because it's very similar to the geometric patterns that people experience when they take psychedelic drugs and psychonautic science is really the study of these hallucination patterns and the ability to navigate through them. And it's fascinating that thousands of years ago, people were in a cave with charcoal drawing these patterns out as they were hallucinating them. So it's very much a timeless practice. It's not something that people just have done in the modern day. It's been going on for millennia.
Yeah. You can take psychedelics and see a tetractus. That's happening all around the world all the time. You know, people are still doing that and have been doing so for thousands of years.
But the fact they were recording that is their methods were almost more advanced than what people are doing today. Like, there's very little study of those geometric patterns actually happening, apart from just a small number of people.
Now, see, like, even with the effects, though, do you guys remember as little kids when you was hanging out with your buddies and you told them to freaking press against your chest while you leaned up against the wall so you could barely breathe? You guys remember doing that?
No, I used to spin around. You spin around and round and round in circles real quick until you get dizzy. That was what we did in Nelson.
But there's also, if you press against your eyeballs, you can also see hallucinations as well. They're pretty out there designs.
You can do a lot of that, and like, it's like, it's not really hard at all. Like my buddy old John, which Vince has met, you know, he talks about visions and stuff, you know, and things of that nature. Whereas he doesn't take drugs, but Mr. Robot, another guy that I know, he's all about like the DMT and the
wicked,
all of that. Cool. So they actually did an interview with one another where one never did drugs and the other one was on drugs, and freaking they both had the same experience, you know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
It was a pretty interesting interview. I got to listen to it and I thought it was pretty good. I don't think either one of them realized how good it was either, you know what I mean? Because it came out really good and very informative. But the whole hallucination thing, man, I mean, I wouldn't go into a cave and try to smoke myself out either. I mean,
I would.
Well, I mean, you would, but you wouldn't use freaking wood to do it, though, would you? You wouldn't be burning logs.
I wouldn't use wood. No, I'd do it the Scythian way, for sure. Now get some hot rocks, superheated hot rocks. Chuck some buds on them, and then just breathe it in.
Well, the Indians did meditation like that too in their teepees, I believe. But they also put drugs and stuff inside the fire too, so they could have visions and stuff.
Yeah, the American Indians also smoked tobacco for hallucinations. So like just strong, huge concentrations of tobacco also can be hallucinogenic.
Yeah, and they didn't have the stuff that we got now, where it's all smaller amounts, and this stuff would have been potent. So okay, now we get to the fun stuff. Now I know Vincent wants to get into theory of forms, but there's a part of Plato that I do want to cover first, and it's Gorgias, the Gorgias dialogue.
Okay.
You guys were talking. I believe it was Julian that was mentioning Plato's play where they're going to a festival. Gorgias is a Socratic dialogue written by Plato around 830 BC. The dialogue depicts a conversation between Socrates and a small group of sophists and other guests at a dinner gathering. Socrates debates with the sophists, seeking the true definition of rhetoric, attempting to pinpoint the essence of rhetoric and unveil the flaws of the sophistic oratory popular in Athens at the time. The art of persuasion was widely considered necessary for political and legal advantage in classical Athens, and rhetoricians promoted themselves as teachers of this fundamental skill. Some, like Gorgias, Gorgias, were foreigners attracted to Athens because of its reputation for intellectual and cultural sophistication. Socrates suggested that he is one of the few Athenians to practice true politics. So, has anybody got anything to say about that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it reminds you of the modern day politics, doesn't it? Where it's not about truth, it's just about how many people you can persuade and with your rhetoric. So,
it comes back
of course,
to the
he's challenging, very much challenging the morality of that sort of thinking. So he's putting himself apart from all these sophists by saying, that he's the only one who's truly looking at politics correctly, which is, it's not about persuading and deceiving people, it's about finding the true ideal society.
Yep.
You had something to say, Vince?
Yeah, no, I just thought it's interesting that that dialogue, in that it depicts a discussion between Socrates and Gorgias. It very much is like Parmenides' distinction between aletheia and doxa again. Socrates represents aletheia, the search for truth, and Gorgias represents doxa, which is really just opinion. Gorgias doesn't care about the truth, he just wants to use opinion to manipulate people. So he's very much coming from the dark side, whereas Socrates is representing the side of enlightenment.
Yep. I think the same thing when it comes to that, and rhetoric especially. I think that's really what it was that I'd learned the last time I was in it. That's what I was telling you, I made a mistake, because I think it was more that Plato was against rhetoric, and a lot of people in today's world, they always like to use memes on the internet as a good example of what Plato was talking about with rhetoric, because that's pretty much what memes are when you go on the internet and go to Facebook and see all these people posting memes. It's just a bunch of rhetoric, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And Plato was against that. And I somehow within the last year and a half got all that mixed up in my head. So again, I apologize about messing that up from the last time we talked, because now I was doing my homework the other day and I ran into that, and I wanted to bring that up because I wanted to clear that up and make it straight that I was wrong about that. So now,
cool.
What else could we be talking about? I mean, other than that, it's time to talk about the forms, theory of forms. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Plato's world of forms really comes down to it's really the end result of all of that we've been discussing this evening. If you take the path of trying to understand the truth of the supermaterial world, in other words, the world of the divine, then you end up with something very much like Plato's world of forms. Just seems to be the end result, where Plato believed that everything that exists here in the material world is a replica of something similar that exists in the world of forms. Only in the world of forms there is the essence of each thing. So in the world of forms there is the essence of a man, for example, the essence of a woman, and each of us who are men and women are essentially degenerate forms of this perfect form which exists in the world of forms. So that's very similar to the that's very similar to the ancient Vedic idea, where you have a perfect upper world, and then there are lower worlds that emanate from that perfect upper world, and these worlds continue to emanate into ever lower and lower essentially material worlds.
Very good. You got anything to say about it, Julian?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, the world of forms. If you look at the structure, um, it really parallels what he's writing about in the Republic in terms of the political structure, because in that society you have the commoners, the masses of people at the lowest level of the three levels. Then you have the auxiliaries, so like the people who are guarding the city, like the military and the public service, and then you have the guardians, and of course at the top you have the philosopher king. So the three levels are paralleled. When you have the supreme good, then you have the world of forms, and then you have the material world. So like Vince has said, the forms are perfect, ideal forms, unblemished, and we are copied from those forms and become imperfect copies, but it is the material world which has come from the ideal world of forms. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
Okay. Now, Bob Dub, what have you learned in this episode? It's your turn.
Dude, I've learned so many things. I love this thing about the difference between truth and opinion. It seems that I haven't quite got what opinion is. It seems like opinion is some sort of nebulous emotional thing, whereas truth is a more factual, absolute thing.
Yeah, well, that's why Plato in Republic, he believed that the philosopher kings, really what made them philosopher kings wasn't intelligence, really was able to perceive the world of forms. Because if you can see the truth from the falsehood, that is really the highest possible qualification for leadership. And if you can't see truth from falsehood, really you should be in a more lower position where you have less responsibility. Because if you put a person who can't see truth from falsehood in a leadership position, then like Plato said, your society's going to go down the toilet in short order.
Wow.
Yep.
It's so good. This idea of there being a perfect version of everything is something that just like tugs on my little girly heartstrings. I'm like, oh, I love that idea.
It's the same as what's spoken about as the higher worlds in elementalism. The idea comes from the world of forms and from the ancient Vedic ideas that the first world that God dreamed up was perfect, but that world soon became boring, and so God ended up dreaming successively worse worlds into existence for the sake of entertainment, and those worlds become more and more imperfect, and our world may or may not be one of the more imperfect ones. You could possibly get more imperfect than this, but yeah, in any case, this world is particularly intense.
So are there 7 musical notes
I think
in
so.
music?
Yeah.
There's 7 notes. And so is it a coincidence that there's 7 musical notes and 7 planets? Or are the planets linked to the musical vibrations? I mean, are we counted in one of the 7th planets? Is Earth one of the 7 planets?
Yes.
Yeah. The planets they represent. They have their analogies with the 7 metals on the great masculine axis.
Mhm.
So the sun, as Plato wrote about in Republic, he used the analogy of the sun, where the sun in the material world is the material equivalent of gold in the world of forms. And so Mercury, the planet Mercury, is of course the second planet, and Mercury is the second metal. And then you have Venus, which represents copper, and you have silver, which represents the moon, and you have the Earth, which is sort of where everything goes around. So that's not really one of them. But then you have Mars, that represents iron, which is why Mars is red, because it represents iron, which is like bloodshed. And then you have Jupiter, which represents tin. And of course, finally, you have Saturn, which represents lead. And so lead, being the furthest metal from gold, is analogous to how Saturn is the furthest planet from the sun. or at least was believed to have been back in the day before they had telescopes. They didn't know about Uranus and Neptune and Plato back then.
Yeah. Now, the original meaning of the term eidos, visible form, and related term morph, which means shape, and phenomena, appearance, from phano, which means shine, Indo-European, or ba, remained stable over the centuries until the beginning of Western philosophy, when they became equivocal, acquiring additional specialized philosophical meaning. Plato used the term eidos and idea interchangeably. The pre-Socratic philosophers, starting with Thales, noted that appearances change, and began to ask what the thing that changes really is. The answer was substance, which stands under the changes and is the actually existing thing being seen. The status of appearance now came into question. What is the form really, and how is that related to substances? Okay. The forms are expounded upon in Plato's dialogue and general speech, in that every object or quality in reality, dogs, human beings, mountains, colors, courage, love, and goodness, has a form. Form answers the question, what is that? Plato was going a step further in asking for what form itself is. He supposed that the object was essentially or really the form, and that the phenomena were mere shadows mimicking the form. That is, momentary portrayals of the form under different circumstances. Okay, so I think...
No, it's very similar. Your shadow is the right term. If you think of yourself, if you see your shadow on the ground, that is in the shape of you, but it's obviously a lower resolution and more degraded form than your actual body. Well, that's very similar to how Plato said that your actual body was a low resolution and degraded form of the form of a man, which exists in the world of forms, and of which you, as a man, are just a shadow.
And of course, it very much relates to the allegory of the cave, mentioning shadows. In that allegory, of course, it's about people who grow up inside a cave and all they see is shadows projected on the wall from a fire, and people are walking past in the background holding up different objects which are casting these shadows. And the people in the cave, of course, think that these shadows are the real world, and that these shadows are all that exists. And one day someone escapes from the cave and suddenly is blinded by the light and can't see anything, but after a few minutes they look around and they can see the real world, and they're just blown away, and they go back into the cave and tell everyone about this amazing world that they've discovered outside the cave, and nobody believed them. Of course. And this allegory is represents the world of forms, because the shadows represent the material world that we live in, and then the outside world represents the world of forms, and then the sunlight, that's representing God, the supreme good.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the analogy of the cave, once people go and see the world of forms and realize how reality actually is, and they go back and tell the people who are still in the cave, they don't believe the people who escaped. They say, you're crazy. And that's Plato was exactly 100% right when it comes to explaining esoteric knowledge to people. Because if really you talk to most people on the street about what we've talked about on the show tonight, about reincarnation and the Tetractys and all this kind of thing, they think we were nuts. And really, that's exactly what Plato was talking about with this analogy of the cave. You get a higher knowledge, you can't actually explain that higher knowledge to lower people. They're just not compatible with it.
And see, that's me bringing up that reading so that I could make sure you guys talk about that cave, because I know that cave is very important. Another thing that stuck out to me every time I heard that was the story of Paul whenever he was on the road to Damascus. You know what I mean? That right there just, I mean, that's just right in your face. The scales, what was it? The scales of prejudice were pulled from his eyes and he was blinded. And after he was blinded, he started to see, you know what I mean? And that's where he changed from hunting Christians down and murdering them to becoming a Christian himself. So that was one thing that really stuck out to me when I first heard that story. I was like, that's exactly what that story is, you know. I mean, that's my take on it, at least. So I really think that if we don't have anything else to say, we can cut it short today and then maybe come up with some more material that we need to talk about, if it's okay with you
Yeah, we've gone
guys.
for just 2 hours. It's quite a good discussion we've had.
Yeah,
Almost
that's
2
why,
hours.
that's why I asked you guys if you wanted to do this, because this is going to be a big one. And plus, it's our first. It's our first one, you know what I mean? It's the first for Into the Abyss with Roger Hanson, and I had the perfect people on here to do this. This was an excellent show, by the way.
Cheers, man. No, I loved it. I think we did really go into the abyss. We went back in time to the real origins of Western thought, Western civilization, really. We're talking about once you split from just making up nonsense into actually looking for truth, you begin the process that led to all the science that we know as Western society today, all the technology and scientific advancement. So really, we're going right down to the bottom of the abyss and the beginning of time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting to go over all that background information first, because you really get the context of, you know, where these philosophers are getting their influences from.
Exactly. But I do want to say something. This is not the bottom of the abyss, because there's more to come. I want to move into some more subjects that relate to this, but it has to do with astronomy, or astrology. Yeah, astrology and astronomy. If we can get into both of them.
Astrotheology. It's also good.
And also another thing that needs to be dealt with, because this is the ancient world, we need to deal with magic and what magic was to the ancient people, because a lot of people have a disconnect with what is today in this world and what it was like back then, you know. So kind of give you an idea of how all of this stuff was eventually how it evolved into what it is today, you know. So that's kind of the stuff that I do want to touch up on, and you guys are welcome to come back and we can pull up some good topics and stuff, and we can still talk about philosophy too, because I don't want to stop there. There's a lot of other good topics that can be discussed. So
I'd love to. Yeah, sounds good.
Nice.
So
Yeah, cheers for having us on, Roger.
hey, is this your first time on with us? What's your thoughts on it? Do you like it?
Yeah, it's interesting, really in depth on all the other philosophers. So, you know, I had to look up some of them myself.
That's pretty good.
It goes deep. It was deep. Good deep show. You know.
Okay. What about you, Bob Dub?
I loved it. I loved having all three of you guys on, talking about these things all from subtly different points of view. It gives a real rich sort of, you know, when you go to a lecture and you listen to some professor presenting a subject, you get his ideas. But being here and listening to all three of you, it's given me such a rich sort of insight into this. I'm very grateful to all of you. Thank you for a wonderful evening.
All right.
Cheers, Bob.
Been
Always
great.
good.
Nice.
Always good to have your support.
And that was an excellent reading that you did. If you ever have any,
Brilliant.
if you have any good readings like that, again, let me know, because I'd like to have you read them on the show for us. Kind of share it with everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah, I
Very
wonder if
kind.
you can. I wonder if you can top that though.
Oh no. Let me get back on there before they think I'm off the show. Let me. Oh man, they straight up booted me at the last second. You guys hear me?
Oh. No.
Yeah.
Can you hear
Yep,
me?
I can now.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it was like Jitsi gave me the boot right at the last second.
No.
I was like, oh my god, let me get it back up. Okay, so I don't want to end it on me getting booted off and you guys not being able to see you. Let me get you guys. There we go. Got it. Okay, so before we leave, do you guys want to say something?
Yeah, I'd just like to say if you're interested in some of these ideas that we've been talking about, I've got a book called Elementalism, where a lot of these very basic ideas are discussed from first principles. So elementalism has tried to go back to the original elements of the nature of reality and discuss things from there. So if you're interested in these philosophical ideas, look up my book Elementalism, and that'll have some more discussions about it.
All right. What about you?
Yeah, and you can also check out our Rumble shows, of course, on Bob's channel, Tiny Baby Kangaroo on Rumble. So that's we do our weekly show on these sort of topics, and we also do our show about New Zealand politics. So if you're interested in New Zealand politics, there's plenty going on.
What about you, Bob Dub?
I'm just really grateful to be here. It's been a really, really wonderful evening, and I have learned so much, and I just am looking forward to your next show.
Okay. And I do want to say I want to recommend going on your guys' channel and listening to these guys. They have some really, really good talks, and I even enjoy hearing the politics in New Zealand, because you guys are amazing. I mean, your country, even the way things are taking place, is just completely unusual. You know what I mean? New Zealand, that's just some amazing stuff. And later on, I'd like to get into a discussion about that too. So, but this is the beginning of Into the Abyss with Roger Hanson. And we can get you back on with my Roger's Real Time Talk Show event, and we can talk about that on there. So,
Yep, sounds brilliant.
I'll let you guys go now, and
All right.
Hope you guys enjoy your day, man.
Cheers, Roger. We're just about to go to bed. It's 2:00 in the morning here.
I know.
Just about to hit the sack. All right.
Good night.
Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.
Catch you next time.
Catch you later, Roger.
Later.
Good night.